I never thought a single slap could change everything. It wasn't the sting on my cheek that broke me. It was the silence that followed. My father, Richard Carter, stood there, chest heaving, his hands still midair like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. My mother sat at the dinner table, her teacup trembling slightly in her hand. For a moment, I prayed she would defend me, tell him he'd gone too far. But she didn't. She just looked at me with those calm, unreadable eyes, the same eyes that had watched him control every corner of our lives for years. I thought that silence meant betrayal. I thought she was choosing him, again, but I was wrong. Because the next words that came out of her mouth would turn our perfect little family into a battlefield and reveal a truth my father had spent decades hiding. It started like every other Sunday dinner, polite conversation, spotless silverware, and tension thick enough to choke on. My father, Richard Carter, sat at the head of the table, his sleeves perfectly rolled, his voice calm but heavy with the authority that ruled our house. My mother, Margaret, served roasted chicken and mashed potatoes in silence while I tried to hold my tongue. But I couldn't anymore. "Dad, I already told you," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not quitting my job. I love what I do." He dropped his fork. The metallic clink was louder than thunder. "Love doesn't pay bills, Emily. You'd make more working for me, where I can keep an eye on you." I felt the heat rising in my chest. "You mean where you can control me?" That word, control, snapped something inside him. He stood, fast. The chair scraped the floor like a scream. Before I could step back, his palm cracked across my face. The impact lit up my vision. My ears rang, my skin burned. I couldn't even breathe. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and my pulse roaring in my ears. My mother's teacup trembled in her hand, porcelain rattling against the saucer. I waited for her to shout at him, to say enough, to protect me, like mothers are supposed to. But instead, she placed her cup down, her voice so calm it sent chills down my spine. "Richard," she said softly. "Sit down." He froze. So did I. That was the first time in my life I'd ever heard my mother command my father. And something in her tone told me this wasn't over. The air in the dining room turned heavy, thick with the kind of quiet that made my stomach twist. My cheeks still throbbed, where his hand had landed, heat radiating beneath my skin. Dad obeyed her command almost mechanically, lowering himself back into his chair. The scrape of wood against tile sounded deafening. No one spoke. The clink of her spoon stirring tea was the only sound. Steam curled upward, delicate and ghostly, between us. I wanted to scream, to demand an apology, to ask her why she was so calm. Instead, I whispered, "Mom, you saw what he did." She didn't look at me. She just said quietly, "Finish your dinner, Emily." My chest tightened. I couldn't tell if she was protecting him or hiding something. Dad's eyes darted between us, confused by her tone. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. Then she spoke again, her voice steady but distant. "Is this how your father treated you, Richard?" He froze mid-bite. The fork slipped from his hand, hitting the plate with a sharp clang. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped. Mom's eyes finally met his. Calm, cold. "You said you'd never become him." Silence. I watched him stiffen, his jaw tightening, the veins in his neck rising. He muttered something under his breath, something about respect and discipline. But she cut him off. "History doesn't have to repeat itself," she said softly, gathering the plates. And as she walked away, I saw his face pale, not from anger this time, but fear. I didn't know why yet, but my mother did. The next morning, the house felt hollow. No shouting, no footsteps, just the faint smell of coffee and the quiet ticking of the clock. I found Mom in the study where no one but Dad was ever allowed to be. The drawers were open, papers scattered across the mahogany desk. "Mom?" I whispered. "What are you doing?" She didn't look up. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a thick brown envelope from the bottom drawer, sealed with a strip of tape. On the front, in neat cursive letters, it read, "For Emily, if anything happens." My stomach dropped. "What is that?" She sighed, brushing dust from the envelope like it was a fragile secret. "Something I hoped you'd never have to see." She handed it to me. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, old photos of bruises, and a police report dated 5 years ago, never filed. You reported him? I breathed. She nodded slowly. I started to. But your father found out before I could finish. He promised he'd change. I wanted to believe him. I could hear the ache in her voice. The kind that comes from years of swallowing pain just to survive. So you kept this? I asked, my voice cracking. Why? Because I knew one day he'd hurt you too, she whispered, and when that day came, I'd be ready. I sank onto the edge of the desk, the weight of her words pressing down on me. For the first time, I realized my mother hadn't been blind to his cruelty. She'd been documenting it quietly, carefully waiting for proof strong enough to bring him down. Then she turned toward me, her eyes tired but resolute. Emily, she said, her voice trembling yet firm, it's time to stop pretending we're safe. That night, the house no longer felt like home, it felt like a trap. Every creak of the floorboards made my pulse race. Mom had hidden the envelope under a loose panel in the kitchen floor, whispering, "If anything happens, you run with this, straight to the police." I wanted to believe it wouldn't come to that, but deep down, I knew better. At 8 p.m., headlights swept across the window. Dad was home early, the engine cut off, and the front door slammed like a gunshot. "Margaret," he barked, voice booming through the hall. "Where's my dinner?" Mom didn't answer. She stood at the sink, staring out into the dark yard, her reflection trembling in the glass. I stood behind her, clutching the edge of the counter. Dad stormed in, his tie crooked, his face red from whiskey and anger. "You two whispering about me again?" "Richard," Mom started, but he grabbed the envelope on the counter, the same one I thought we'd hidden. He must have found it. He tore it open, papers scattering like snow. "What the hell is this?" he roared. "Photos? Reports? You've been spying on me?" Mom's voice stayed eerily calm. "Protecting us." He threw the papers on the floor and turned toward me, his eyes blazing. You think your mother's some kind of hero now? You've always taken her side." He took a step forward. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall, his hand twitched, ready to strike again. But before he could, Mom stepped between us. She grabbed his wrist, hard, her nails digging into his skin. For the first time, he looked stunned. "Touch her again," she said quietly. "And I swear to God, Richard, I'll make sure you never see daylight again." He yanked his arm free, laughing low, bitter, dangerous. "You don't have the guts." Mom's expression didn't change. "Try me." For the first time in my life, I saw my father hesitate. And for the first time, I saw my mother, fragile, gentle, always quiet, become something unbreakable. Dad's laugh died in his throat when Mom walked past him without flinching. She moved with a quiet certainty that terrified me, and clearly, it terrified him too. She opened the cabinet near the dining room and pulled out a small black box. "Do you remember this, Richard?" she asked, setting it on the table. He frowned. "What are you doing?" She pressed a button. A soft click, then a crackling hum. The box lit up with a blue glow, and suddenly, his own voice filled the room. "You think you can talk back to me like that again, Margaret? I'll teach you some respect." The sound of something crashing, her muffled sobs, his shouting, my stomach twisted. The voice was unmistakable, his rage immortalized in the air between us. Dad lunged forward to grab the device, but Mom was faster. She stepped back, lifting her phone. "Touch me, and I'll stream this to every board member you've ever bribed." "Margaret," he hissed, face pale now. "You wouldn't dare." She tilted her head slightly. "Wouldn't I?" For the first time in my life, my father, the man who ruled this house, like a king, looked small. Then Mom opened her laptop, already connected to the living room TV. Dozens of video files filled the screen, labeled neatly by date, 2018, 2023. She clicked one. The footage played, grainy clips from hidden cameras she'd placed around the house. Dad pacing, yelling, slamming doors. The night he shattered a wine glass against the wall. The time he threw a phone that barely missed her head. "You recorded me?" he shouted. Mom's voice didn't waver. "You recorded yourself. I just kept the receipts." I stared at the screen, frozen. Every memory I'd buried came alive, every apology, every, "I didn't mean it," every time he'd blamed us for making him angry. "You don't get it," he barked, voice trembling now. "You're destroying our family." Mom's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No, Richard. You destroyed it the moment you decided fear was love." He reached for her laptop, but she slammed it shut before he could touch it. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" he spat. "They'll say you're hysterical, bitter." "They'll believe the evidence," she interrupted. "Especially the financial files." That word hit him like a slap. He froze. Mom turned to me, her tone steady. "Emily, you should know the truth. Your father hasn't just been hurting us, he's been stealing from his own company." Dad's jaw dropped. "Margaret!" he snapped. "Shut up!" She ignored him, pulling another envelope from the drawer and tossing it on the table. "He's been funneling money through fake accounts for years, bonuses that never existed, charity donations that never reached the charities." His face went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about." Mom crossed her arms. "Detective Harris does." That name sliced through the room like ice. He blinked. "Who?" Right then, the front doorbell rang. Once, twice. Flashing red and blue lights spilled through the window. Dad's voice cracked. "You called the police?" Mom didn't even flinch. "I called them months ago." Footsteps approached outside. Then knocking. He turned toward me, desperate. "Emily, tell them it's all lies. Tell them your mother's sick. Tell them—" "Enough!" I shouted, surprising even myself. "I'm done lying for you." He stared at me, like he didn't recognize me anymore. The door opened. 2 officers stepped in, followed by a man in a gray suit, Detective Harris. "Richard Carter?" "Yes," Dad snapped. "What is this about?" "You're under arrest for domestic abuse and embezzlement," the detective said calmly. Dad spun toward Mom. "You set me up," he whispered. She looked him dead in the eye. "No, Richard. You set yourself up. I just made sure it was recorded." The officers moved in, cuffing him as he shouted threats about lawyers, about revenge, about how no one would believe a woman like her. But this time, no one listened. As they let him out, the air in the house shifted. It was like a storm had finally passed but left behind wreckage we hadn't even begun to clean. Mom sank into a chair, trembling for the first time. I knelt beside her, gripping her hands. "You did it," I whispered. "You really did it." Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was faint, bittersweet. "No, Emily. We did it." Outside, the police car's lights painted our walls red and blue, fading as it pulled away. For the first time in years, I could breathe. And for the first time, my mother looked free. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. It wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence that follows destruction, when the walls still remember the shouting, but the air finally feels light enough to breathe. I walked through the dining room where it had all happened, the shattered teacup still on the floor, the chair knocked over, the faint smell of coffee and adrenaline hanging in the air. For the first time, that room didn't belong to him anymore. Mom sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, staring out at the morning fog. Her eyes were swollen but clear. I brought her a cup of tea, the same blend she used to drink in silence while he yelled. She smiled weakly. "It's over," she whispered. I sat beside her. "Is it?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she said softly, "The storm ends when you stop being afraid of the thunder." We sat there as the sun rose, turning the gray sky into something golden. For once, the world felt safe. The next few days passed in a blur of statements, interviews, and paperwork. Detective Harris called often, updating us on the case. The charges were serious domestic abuse, fraud, tax evasion. The evidence Mom had collected made it airtight. When the news broke, the town was stunned. Respected businessman Richard Carter arrested for assault and embezzlement. Headlines painted him as a hypocrite, the model citizen hiding a monster's temper behind his perfect lawn and white picket fence. At the grocery store, people whispered when they saw me. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered sympathy they didn't know how to express. I didn't care. For the first time, I wasn't carrying shame that wasn't mine. Mom and I spent nights going through the house, boxing up everything that reminded us of him, his trophies, his cufflinks, his framed Employee of the Year photos. Each thud of the box hitting the floor felt like reclaiming another piece of our freedom. When I found an old family photo of the three of us smiling at the beach, before everything fell apart, I froze. Mom took it gently from my hands, looked at it for a second, and then tore it cleanly in half. "We're not erasing the past," she said quietly. "We're just refusing to live in it." I nodded, tears burning my eyes. That night, we lit a small fire in the backyard. Not a dramatic bonfire, just a quiet one. We fed it letters, photos, broken things we no longer needed. Watching them burn felt both painful and peaceful. Mom reached for my hand. "I should have left him years ago," she murmured. "I thought staying would keep us safe." I squeezed her fingers. "You saved me when I thought you never would." And the flames flickered in her eyes, and for a second, I saw something fierce, not guilt, not fear, but resolve. When the fire went out, the stars came out bright and clear, like they hadn't dared to shine over our house in years. And for the first time, I didn't dread tomorrow. Because tomorrow, we'd wake up in a home that finally belonged to us. Months passed. The seasons changed, and so did we. Our house, once echoing with his voice, slowly filled with new sounds, laughter, music, quiet conversations that didn't end in fear. Mom and I moved into a smaller home on the other side of town. No marble floors, no grand dining room, just warmth and peace. The first night there, we slept with the windows open, listening to the rain instead of footsteps pacing the hallway. I started a new job at a nonprofit organization that supported women escaping abusive homes. My supervisor, a kind woman named Lydia, had been through her own battle years ago. She understood the tremble in my voice the first time I spoke to a survivor on the phone. "It gets easier," she told me, "but you'll never forget, and that's what makes you good at this." Mom joined one of our support groups not as a victim, but as a mentor. I watched her sit with younger women, listening to their stories, her voice calm and steady. "You're stronger than you think," she'd say. "Silence doesn't protect you, it only protects him." Hearing her say those words made me proud and heartbroken at the same time. Then came the day of the trial. The courthouse smelled of old wood and nerves. Reporters gathered outside, cameras flashing as Dad was escorted in, wrists bound. He looked smaller, somehow thinner, tired, but his eyes still sharp with pride. When the judge read the charges: domestic assault, fraud, obstruction of justice, his jaw clenched. Our lawyer, Clara Vaughn, presented the footage, the audio recordings, and Mom's years of documentation. Dad's lawyer tried to twist it, saying we exaggerated, that Mom was emotionally unstable, that I provoked him. But the evidence spoke louder than any of his excuses. And when the audio of his voice threatening to teach us both a lesson filled the courtroom, even the judge looked disgusted. The verdict came swift and hard. 8 years in state prison, with no chance of parole for the first 5. Mom didn't cry. She just exhaled slow, shaky, but free. Outside the courthouse, she looked up at the sky. "He can't hurt us anymore," she whispered. I took her hand. "What now?" She smiled faintly. "Now, we start living." The next few months felt like breathing again for the first time in years. We painted the walls of our new home in soft colors, pale blue for calm, light yellow for hope. Mom started gardening. I started therapy. There were nights when I'd wake from dreams of shouting, and she'd come into my room, just like when I was little, sitting by my bed until I fell asleep again. Sometimes she'd wake up screaming too, and I'd make her tea, reminding her we were safe. Healing wasn't neat. It came in waves, some small, some that knocked us down again. But every time, we got up. One evening, after a community meeting, a young girl around my age came up to me. "I saw your story in the paper," she said. "Your mom's brave. So are you." Her voice shook. Can I ask you how you stopped being afraid?" I smiled softly. "You don't stop being afraid," I said. "You just learn that fear doesn't have to decide for you." That night, as I watched Mom watering the plants under the porch light, I realized something simple but powerful. Our story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming peace. And as she looked up and caught me watching her, she smiled the kind of smile that said we survived. The kind that said we're finally free. 2 years later, the wounds had faded, but the lessons stayed. Our lives were no longer defined by fear, they were built on something steadier, something earned: peace. Mom's hair had gone a little grayer, her hands rough from gardening, but her eyes, God, her eyes finally looked alive. Every Sunday, she volunteered at the shelter where I worked, sitting with women who reminded her of herself years ago. Sometimes she'd share our story. Sometimes she just listened. Both healed her. I'd been promoted to program coordinator. My days were filled with stories like ours, raw, painful, but full of rebirth. Every time I helped a woman sign her first lease for a new apartment or get her first paycheck after leaving a violent home, I saw a reflection of the moment Mom and I packed our last box. One afternoon, I came home to find her on the porch, folding letters. The sun dipped low behind her, casting golden light over everything. "Another letter from the state," she said, handing it to me. Dad's parole hearing had been denied. He'd stay behind bars for at least 3 more years. I nodded slowly. "How do you feel?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Free. Not because he's gone, but because we stopped letting him define who we are." That night, we had dinner together, just the two of us, at a small wooden table. No shouting, no fear. The air smelled like rosemary and peace. Afterward, I looked at her and asked quietly, "Mom, the night he hit me, when you didn't stop him right away, why were you so calm?" She set her fork down, met my eyes, and said, "Because that was the moment I decided I'd end it. Not with another scream, not with tears, but with proof, with strength, with a plan he couldn't destroy." I swallowed hard. "You weren't afraid?" She smiled faintly. "Of course I was. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Emily. It's doing what's right while your hands still shake." Her words stayed with me. Now, every time I stand before a group of survivors sharing my story, I begin with that same truth. Sometimes, the people who save you are the ones you thought never would. Sometimes, strength sounds like silence before the storm. And when I see the recognition in their faces, the spark of hope, I realize that what my mother did that night went far beyond protecting me. She taught me that real love doesn't hide behind control, that silence can be a weapon or a shield, and that the moment you choose to fight back, even quietly, the whole world begins to change. As I leave the shelter each evening, I look up at the stars and think of the girl I was, the one standing in that dining room, cheek burning, terrified and alone. I wish I could tell her, "You were never powerless. You just hadn't seen her power yet." Because the night my father slapped me, my mother didn't just save me, she saved us both.